going to look at making the apertures on the front and the back of our handbag. So I'm going to use, for my facing panel, you've got options here. You can either use a piece of your fabric that you're using for the exterior or something very similar in colour. And I would interface that with a non-woven fusible interfacing. If you're using a thicker fabric, something like faux leather or a canvas, then you may find it easier just to use a piece of non-woven interfacing. However, unfortunately, non-woven interfacing tends to come in two colours. It's either white or sometimes just off-white or black. So if you've got a brightly coloured exterior, you may find that you have tiny bits showing, which ideally you don't want to have. If you use white interfacing, you can actually use a fabric marker, just if you've got any that shows, just to kind of colour out those little white bits that show. Oh, I've got a wasp in here. I'm just going to I'm going to open the window and let him out. There we go, he's gone. So you're going to mark up your pieces of non-woven fusible interfacing in the way it tells you in the pattern. Always put a T at the top so you know that this is the top edge. You're going to make a mark that is 3/4 of an inch away from the top edge, another mark that is 7/8 of an inch from the left and 7/8 of an inch from the right, and then an inch, getting my words muddled, another mark that is 7/8 of an inch from that top line. But you must put the T on, because if you don't and you get them upside down, then your apertures will not sit level with each other and it'll all be higgledy-piggledy. So this is the front panel for my bag, so I'm going to need 2 of these because I'm going to have 2 apertures. I've marked a line that is 2 inches from the top straight edge, and then using my ruler along that line, I've measured 2 1/8 of an inch in from the side, and I've done a line that is going from sort of top to bottom of the bag. So I've created a sort of a right angle, if you will. So I've got a kind of a line that comes across here at 2 inches, and then one that comes down that's 2 1/8 of an inch away from the edge on that line. I'm going to take my first piece of interfacing and I'm going to position it within that 90-degree angle that I've made. Now, I find it's easier to do this adding just a tiny little bit of decorator's tape, masking tape, whatever you want to call it. Depends where you live in the world. In the UK here, just made a pig's ear of that, we call this masking tape, and I know in the USA you call it decorator's tape. But it's the sort of tape that you can use and you can peel off and it doesn't leave sticky residue everywhere. It just helps to hold it where it needs to be. I'm going to position the second one in exactly the same way on the other side of the bag. So I'm popping my piece of interfacing, making sure that the T is towards the top of the bag, which is the narrower end of your panel. I'm just going to pop that little bit of duct tape, a little bit of decorator's tape on there to hold it in place. I just find it's easier to keep them in place using a little bit of tape. Now I'm going to reduce my stitch length down a little bit because this is easier with a very short stitch. So I'm going to reduce my stitch down to just over 2, and I'm going to stitch down the sides of that rectangle that we've created in the middle of our piece of facing. So I'm just going to drop my needle in right on the very corner, and then I'm going to slowly just doing a couple of back stitches to secure my stitching. Stitch down the side of that rectangle. I'm going to do exactly the same on the other side, and you will notice that we don't have any foam stabilizer added yet, and that's correct. You're not supposed to have foam stabilizer on yet. So if you've gone a bit ahead and so basted your stabilizer onto your exterior panels, take it off again, because you don't need it now. You'll make making the apertures will be lots harder if you've got foam already on. So I'm literally just stitching across those lines. A couple of back stitches to secure my stitching. I'll do the second one as well, simply because I've got it there and I might as well do it while I'm here. So again, I'm just dropping my needle in right on that corner. You don't want to stitch outside of that rectangle. That's one, and two, there we go. And I just need, I don't know what I did with my cutting mat. I'm going to use this instead. This is my little chopping board. I'm going to take my craft knife and I'm going to cut a cross inside of that rectangle that I've made, and I'm going to go from the top left corner to the bottom right corner and then the opposite way around. So basically I'm creating, as you would with a sort of a pocket facing or a pocket aperture, you're cutting right to the corners, but you're not cutting through your stitching. And I find it easier to turn round to do the second half of my second half of my cut. I obviously hadn't got that secured in very well. Make sure you're using a nice sharp blade. And what you'll end up with is just a little cut. Now if I can pop the blade through that, and I'll probably show you easier. You can see it's gone right the way through. And I'm going to remove that bit of masking tape, but I'm going to keep it because I might use it again in a second. And it depends on how stiff your interfacing is. Now this bit of interfacing is actually quite a thick one, but it's the only black one I have, so I'm using it and I'm hoping that it's going to work. Just finger press either side just to give it a bit of extra help to go through, and you're going to push that piece of facing through your aperture that you've just, through the cuts that you've just made. You may need to come to the back and sort of encourage it through. And there we go, that's just popped through nicely. From the front, you can see I've now got a fairly square looking aperture. Actually, I'm quite pleased with that. So because I'm using fabric for the exterior, I can actually press this. If you're using faux leather, then you will just need to finger press very carefully. Just make sure that your aperture is perfectly rectangular. Don't worry about the facing on the back being a bit puckered. What you don't want are any puckers on the front. I don't sew the short ends of that rectangle because if I do, then I will have puckers. So I'm just going to press that until I'm happy, which, let me just put a bit of white paper or something behind it so you can kind of see that that's a lovely rectangle. You can see there, that's a really nice rectangle. Excuse me. Oh, I've come unthreaded, so I just need to thread the machine again. Now you can increase your stitch length now because you're going to top stitch around that aperture. However, I wouldn't increase it to what the sort of length that you would normally increase your stitch length to. I think about just over 3 is sufficient. You need long threads on the machine at the top and the bottom, so pull your threads out because you're going to be burying your threads. You don't want to see an obvious start and stop to your stitching. And you're going to stitch around that aperture using an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm just dropping my needle in. Pivot at the top. And coming along the bottom. What you want to try and do is finish your stitching in the same hole as you did your first stitch. And I need to go across just a tad more because I'm not quite there. That's better. I'm just going to hand crank that last stitch. Pull your work away. And grab a self-threading needle. You pull the work away and have nice long threads. Grab a self-threading needle and take both of those threads from the front through your work and to the back. So now you have the 2 threads from the front and the 2 threads from the back, and you're just going to tie those off. It means you don't have any back stitching around your apertures, so there's no obvious start or end to your stitching. It's a really tidy way to finish off any kind of aperture like that. I'm leaving approximately 3/8 of an inch, and you can use a little bit of fabric glue if you want to, just to glue those down, but they actually they don't bother me particularly, and you're going to do a second line of stitching around which will secure those thread ends anyway. So now you have a perfectly rectangular aperture. You're going to do exactly the same with the second one on the front. Now on the back of your bag, you're going to do this exact same thing. So you're making a line 2 inches from the top, you're making those lines 2 1/4 inches in from the edges. Now I'm not actually measuring this, I'm just going to place them to show you. So you'll have one on either side, but you're also going to have one that's central. So you can fold this panel in half, or you can use your tape measure or your ruler, and you're going to make sure that you have one that is central as well. So you're going to end up with 3 apertures on the back. You must make sure that the T is at the top on each of them, otherwise you're going to find that one of your apertures is sitting too high. So this is a 2 inch line, 2 1/8 inch from the side of that line to position this one, 2 1/8 inch from this side to position this one, and the third one goes centrally along the top. Now this is quite stiff interfacing, so when I turn it through that hole, it sits quite nicely once I've pressed it. If it doesn't, you can pull it out and just tape it down on the back, which will help to keep it in place as you do your top stitching. Everybody's different and everybody will have different interfacing, but using a bit of masking tape or decorator's tape to kind of hold that in place is a really good idea. It stops it jiggling about. If you're using something that isn't a non-woven interfacing, you may find as you do your top stitching, what you might want to do is kind of lift your work up and just hold the interfacing, kind of pull it out from the hole as you stitch to make sure that none of the interfacing is showing within your aperture. So that's how we do the apertures on the front and back. I'm going to get on and finish the rest of my other 4 apertures, and I'll come back and show you how we do the ones on the sides.